emphasizing our thesis on how the Atlantic world had positive impacts on Africa. A Nigerian professor at Harvard called Ariel Abuela states that colonization became the basis of the transition from an agrarian to an industrial technological civilization in Africa. So moving on, there was also an Islamic colony in Africa, and this colony had started to spread their influence ever since the century after Muhammad's death, and the Islamic influence came through trade routes to Africa. With the Islamic influence, you can see that some of the government structures in Africa had been modeled after Islamic ruling systems, and there was also hints of Arabic being spoken in Africa. And for those who didn't know, Arabic is the main language for the Islams or the Muslims. The Islamic colony introduced literacy to Africa, and it expanded because most of the people were educated through Islamic ideals. And the Islamic colony also contributed in the process of state building in Africa. And as I mentioned, there were hints of the government structures of Islam seen in the government structures of Africa. And the Islamic colony also established interstate diplomacy in Africa, as well as created commercial networks throughout the continent. To conclude, there were positive colonial impacts that were formed during the Atlantic era by the Europeans, the whites, and basically the people in the Atlantic. And the European influence provided Africa with wealth, foreign technological advances, and exposure to new cultures and ideas.